приятно и радостно знать, что кровь, обильно пролитая нашими людьми, не прошла так, а дала свои результаты.
In the dark corners of the life of one of the most enigmatic and feared figures in history, nested the most efficient strategy and leadership, as well as the most unrestrained madness and violence. We are talking about Joseph Stalin, a psychologically unstable leader whose decisions left an indelible mark on humanity. The Soviet commander was much more than a driver, as his life was marked by violence, the famous purges of his enemies, and an obsessive pursuit of absolute power. How did this man come to play such a crucial role at one of the most critical moments of the 20th century? In today's video, we will explore the atrocities committed by Stalin. We will trace the path from his rise to power to his ruthless tactics to stay on top. We will uncover the events that led to the death of countless people, the creation of the dreaded Gulag, and the key role he played in the defeat of Nazi Germany. Prepare for a journey to the core of one of the most twisted minds in the world. In the vast tapestry of the history of the last century, the figure of Joseph Stalin emerges as one of the most striking and controversial characters among all authoritarian and charismatic leaders. To understand the rise to power of this Soviet leader, we must delve into his roots and explore the intricate threads that wove the beginning of his biography. Stalin was born with the name Yosif Vissarionovich Djugashvili on December 18, 1878, in Gori, Georgia. He was the son of modest and hard-working parents, a cobbler and a washerwoman. These origins in the lower class would shape his political thinking. From his youth, he demonstrated exceptional tenacity, a trait that would later be crucial in his path to power. His life took a crucial turn when he entered the seminary in Tiflis to become a priest. The poverty and hunger he witnessed while studying nurtured the seed of social discontent already germinating in his mind. Influenced by the revolutionary ideas circulating in the air of Tsarist Russia, he abandoned the seminary and joined clandestine socialist groups. The 1910s marked a tumultuous period for Russia and for this character. He adopted the name Stalin, which means man of steel, and actively participated in political activities of rebellion at the time. The outbreak of the October Revolution in 1917 offered him the perfect platform to deploy his political skills. The Russian leader, cunning and strategic, ascended meteorically through the ranks of the Bolshevik Party led by Lenin. It is impossible to understand Stalin's political mind without knowing his leader. Let's briefly review his figure. Lenin was a visionary leader and the architect of one of the most pivotal episodes in Russian history, the aforementioned October Revolution of 1917. Forger of a regime that would change the course of the country forever, he personified the transition from Tsarism to the Soviet era. Lenin, whose original name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, was born in 1870 and became the undisputed leader of the Bolshevik Party. Notice how Stalin mimics the strategy of changing his name, just like his role model. Lenin's ideology, based on the theories of Karl Marx, advocated for the proletariat's seizure of power. The slogan, "Bread, Land, and Peace," resonated in a country suffocated by World War I and Tsarist oppression. The October Revolution marked the climax of Lenin's career. His determination and strategic leadership led to the overthrow of the provisional government and the establishment of the Soviet government. In this way, he implemented radical policies such as the nationalization of land and the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which removed Russia from World War I. Under Lenin's leadership, the Soviet Union was formed in 1922, consolidating a new communist regime to which Stalin subscribed. This government implemented the New Economic Policy, a measure to stabilize the country after the devastation of the Civil War. However, his health deteriorated rapidly. In 1924, Lenin suffered a series of strokes that left him incapacitated. His death in January of that year marked the end of an era and triggered a power struggle among Bolshevik leaders. Let's see footage from the funeral. The power vacuum paved the way for the rise of Joseph Stalin and the subsequent establishment of a regime characterized by totalitarianism and repression. After Lenin's death, Stalin embarked on a fierce power struggle, competing with prominent figures like Trotsky. However, he had an advantage. His role as General Secretary of the Communist Party had granted him strategic control over internal structures. Thus, using ruthless political tactics and merciless purges, Stalin suppressed his rivals and consolidated his dominance. Let's pause to explain where the word purge comes from in Russian history. The term stems from the historical event known as the Great Purge, or the Great Terror. It consisted of a series of political repression and persecution campaigns carried out in the Soviet Union, in which hundreds of thousands of members of the Soviet Communist Party, socialists, anarchists, and opponents were persecuted. Their fates varied. They could be imprisoned, taken to concentration camps, or executed outright. In the quest to eliminate Trotsky, there was much at stake for the future dictator. Let's learn about the profile of his rival at that time. Leon Trotsky was a pivotal figure in the Russian Revolution and the most prominent antagonist of Joseph Stalin. From his key involvement alongside Lenin in the Bolshevik seizure of power in 1917, Trotsky played a crucial role in shaping the new Soviet political order. From an ideological perspective, he advocated for the international expansion of the socialist revolution, a vision that clashed with Stalin's focus on socialism in one country. The creation of the Red Army, under Trotsky's leadership, was essential for the survival of the fledgling communist regime, an objective that conflicted with Stalin's intentions. However, his political fate took a turn after Lenin's death in 1924. In the struggle for succession, Trotsky succumbed to Stalin's ruthless onslaught and was exiled. Despite his exile, he continued to be a critical voice of the Stalinist regime, developing the theory of the permanent revolution, which advocated for continuous changes and global expansion of socialist rebellion. The leader's life reached its tragic conclusion in 1940 when he was assassinated in Mexico by a Stalinist agent. This event, beyond underscoring the importance he still held despite being in exile, speaks of the almost unhealthy fixation Stalin had on his rival. Such behaviors of instability would repeat in the Soviet leader. But we will address this theme later. Returning to his rise to power, In 1928, Stalin launched the first of a series of bold initiatives, known as the 5-year plans, with the aim of transforming the Russian economy. As the Soviet Union underwent radical changes, Stalin forged his image as an undisputed leader, an omnipresent figure through propaganda and personality cult. Let's see an impressive example.
Можно мне вас поцеловать, товарищ Сталин? За все! За все, что вы сделали для нашего народа! Для нас! Joseph Stalin!
Viva Stalin! Vive notre Stalin!
Мира и счастья всем вам, друзья мои.
His regime was characterized by political repression, massive purges, and the system of forced labor camps, known as the Gulag. However, his ability to lead during World War II and his skill in establishing the Soviet Union as an influential superpower earned him the support of almost a large part of the population, despite the atrocities he carried out. In retrospect, Stalin's origins reveal a mix of historical circumstances, personal ambitions, and unwavering will, which propelled him from the margins of society to the epicenter of world domination. His legacy, a tapestry woven with the threads of victory and brutality, continues to provoke debates and reflections on the scope of tyranny and its consequences. Therefore, it is valid to ask, how much power did this character really wield? At the height of his dominance, Joseph Stalin was a skilled driver, marked by astute political machinations, internal intrigues, and the consolidation of a regime that would leave an indelible mark on his country's history. After Lenin's death and the struggle for succession, the shrewd man of steel was unleashed within the Communist Party, deploying calculated political tactics to climb the hierarchy. In order for society to accompany him in his ascent to total power, he took bold initiatives to industrialize and reconfigure the Soviet economy. Through this transformation, Stalin sought to modernize the USSR and consolidate his legitimacy as the undisputed leader of the state. The Soviet propaganda machine was as powerful as that of the Nazis. The cult of personality reached new heights with the spread of images and narratives that highlighted Stalin as an uncompromising and visionary leader. His omnipresent presence was reflected in the daily lives of Soviet citizens, with posters on the streets and slogans exalting his role as the father of the nations. During the 1930s, the massive purges, known as the Moscow Trials, reached their peak. High-ranking officials and military personnel were accused of conspiring against the state, leading to their execution or imprisonment in forced labor camps. This period of political repression aimed to eliminate any vestige of internal opposition and further consolidate his control. In 1939, the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany provided Stalin with a period of relative stability on the Western Front. This treaty, also known as the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, was an agreement signed between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union on August 23rd, just before the outbreak of World War II. This pact established that both nations would not attack each other and also agreed to divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. However, when Hitler broke the treaty in 1941, the Soviets joined the conflict. Stalin's ability to lead during this conflict, marked by the Soviet victory in the Battle of Stalingrad, solidified his status as an undisputed leader. This period of zenith was marked by the paradox of a leader who, while modernizing and strengthening his country, also fostered an authoritarian and repressive regime. The complexities of his leadership between strategic victories and brutal repression, invite us to reflect on the nature of power and its consequences. Let's discuss some of the most atrocious cases that occurred during the reign of this man of steel. In the darkest pages of history, Stalin's regime left indelible scars on the fabric of Soviet society. The Great Purge of the 1930s stands as a dark symphony of repression, characterized by mass arrests, deportations, and summary executions. We are talking about millions of lives exterminated in the name of a demagogic and thoughtless leader. At the heart of this tragedy are the dreaded gulags, the forced labor camps where despair and brutality coexisted in sinister harmony.
There were many dead people in this camp. This was the only camp where you truly saw corpses. People died because of dystrophy, hunger, because of the awful food, lice, dirtiness, and everything else.
In these detention centers, those deemed enemies of the state faced inhumane living conditions, strenuous labor, and a high mortality rate. The fearsome guards physically punished the inmates, subjecting them to humiliations similar to those seen in Auschwitz and Treblinka. The gulags became synonymous with suffering, a tangible testament to the boundless cruelty of the Stalinist regime. But one of the most striking and devastating cases was the genocide ordered by Stalin in a nation close to Russia. Soviet Ukraine witnessed a heartbreaking atrocity, the Holodomor famine. Conceived as a tool to suppress Ukrainian resistance to forced collectivization, this tactic resulted in the deaths of millions due to hunger and repression. The Holodomor famine emerges as one of the darkest chapters of Soviet communism, where political ideology translated into unimaginable human suffering. Millions of Ukrainians were forced to starve, leading to unimaginable and monstrous scenes. Among them, there are testimonies of acts of cannibalism committed by peasants to avoid starving to death. Among these shocking stories, some included accounts of how relatives fed on the bodies of children who had died of starvation. On the other hand, the Katyn massacre is an example of brutality against Polish prisoners of war. Personally ordered by Stalin, the NKVD, the Soviet state police, executed thousands of Polish soldiers and then concealed the horror behind a veil of propagandistic lies. The goal was as simple as it was sinister: to kill all witnesses of the massacre in an attempt to erase any trace of the atrocities committed on Polish territory after the Soviet invasion. This bloody act marked a strategy of repression that was repeated in various forms throughout the Stalinist era. In the sordid web of purges and repression, every spark of disloyalty to the regime could ignite the flame of death. Those considered traitors were especially persecuted by Stalin.
Marshal Tukhachevsky, a man who kept warning about the danger Hitler represented, is accused of being a spy working for the Gestapo. He is executed in June 1937. Along with him, 40,000 high-ranking officials, including most of the generals, are eliminated. The Red Army has lost its head. The goal of the purge of political, economic, military and police-related elites is to replace leaders of the Leninist revolution period by a younger generation, more obedient and that can more easily be manipulated politically and ideologically.
The figures of the supposed internal detractors to the government amounted to millions, but behind each number hides an individual tragedy, a tale of human suffering that defies all understanding. The history was painful. Soviets were killing their fellow countrymen. By exploring these atrocities, we confront the stark reality of a regime that disregarded life in favor of a distorted vision of power. Beyond the numbers, these horrors of Stalin serve as grim reminders of humanity's capacity to inflict pain and suffering when the thirst for dominance is unleashed, unrestrained. It begs the question, how could one man have perpetrated such atrocities? Let's delve into the psychological labyrinth of Stalin. We're talking about a leader whose mental stability remains the subject of intense speculation. When examining the psychological health of the Soviet leader, we plunge into a murky terrain of uncertainty, where the line between sanity and madness becomes blurred. The actions of this figure, marked by massive purges and brutal repression, raise the inevitable question: was he insane? Historians, psychologists, and scholars have debated for decades about the nature of the mind of this Soviet Iron Man. Some suggest that Stalin exhibited traits of paranoia, extreme distrust, and an excessive obsession with control. The dictator's personal history, marked by the early loss of loved ones and his relentless rise to power, offers clues to the complexity of his psyche. The cruelty of his reign could be interpreted as a desperate attempt to solidify his position and crush any perceived threat. Was he, perhaps, a despot ruled by distrust and constant fear of betrayal? Historians have not reached a unanimous consensus on Stalin's mental health. Some argue that his behavior reflects a cold and calculating political profile, while others suggest that his actions may be linked to unresolved personal traumas. The intersection between individual psyche and complicated historical context remains an enigma. Stalin's paranoid dictatorship stands as a paradigmatic case of the dangers of absolute power over the human mind. His ability to eliminate rivals, rewrite history, and cultivate a cult of personality reflect masterful manipulation of institutions and reality itself. Another question arises: why did he do what he did? There's likely no clear why. Those who suffered the consequences were the inhabitants of Soviet soil, who found themselves at the mercy of the abominable actions of a despot willing to sacrifice his own people to secure a place in history. Ultimately, the answer remains a true mystery with no apparent solution. Only a mind as twisted as Hitler's could stand against him, and that's why Stalin's figure was crucial to facing the Führer. Let's listen to the speech to his troops.
За полный разгром немецких захватчиков, смерть немецким оккупантам. Да здравствует наша славная Родина, ее свобода, ее независимость. Под знаменем Ленина вперед, победа!
The Battle of Stalingrad was a reflection of Soviet tenacity. The Russian leader, aware of the strategic importance of the city, ordered fierce resistance. The streets turned into battlefields, and the civilian population joined the fight. the local tactic of building a network of trenches and defensive positions turned every meter of ground into a deadly trap for the German invaders. Stalin also played a MasterCard by leveraging the harsh Russian winter as an ally. The extreme weather conditions disadvantaged the poorly equipped Nazi forces to face the Siberian cold. The Soviet defensive strategy was combined with a well-coordinated offensive led by Marshal Zhukov, which besieged the German troops. Another key battleground in this conflict was the Battle of Berlin in 1945, which marked the climax of the confrontation. With the aim set on the German capital, Stalin deployed a plan that encircled the city and led the Red Army directly to Hitler's bunker doors. The enveloping operation and the intensity of urban combat led to the collapse of the Nazi regime. The role of the Russian dictator in the victory over the Führer was not limited to the military theater, but also influenced the Yalta Conference in 1945, where the Allied leaders outlined the post-war global reorganization. The main purpose of the conference was to discuss the terms for the surrender of Germany and to plan the future of Europe. Important decisions were made regarding the establishment of democratic governments in liberated countries, the division of Germany into occupation zones, the creation of the United Nations, and the Soviet Union's participation in the war against Japan. Alongside the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, Stalin was immortalized in one of the most significant photographs of the 20th century. Although Stalin has been a controversial leader whose identity is tainted with blood due to ruthless actions executed against his own people, he remains a fascinating character to scrutinize. In this way, we reach the conclusion of this installment. We look forward to reading your valuable comments and appreciate your participation. Thank you for staying until the end, and we look forward to seeing you in the upcoming episodes of Military History.